Got it. Hi everyone, I'm Claudia Webbe and I'm the Member of Parliament for Leicester East and Vice Chair of the Brazil Solidarity Initiative. Now, before we start, translation is actually available for those joining on Zoom for both English and Portuguese. So if you require translation, just click the interpretation button, which you'll find at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and select the language that you need. So if that's okay, we'll begin. So tonight's meeting is hosted by the Brazil Solidarity Initiative, and Brazil matters. As well as everyone joining us on the Zoom, we are live streaming across various Facebook pages and YouTube and Twitter. We're here tonight, of course, to celebrate the life and work of murdered human rights activist and Rio councillor Marielle Franco, as well as show our support for the resistance of Black women against the far right in Brazil. 3 years ago, on March the 14th, Marielle and her driver, Anderson Gomez, were fatally shot in a targeted political assassination. And while the gunmen have been arrested, we are still calling for justice and seeking answers to who murdered her and who ordered that murder. This meeting comes on the backdrop of devastating news from Brazil. The death toll from the pandemic has now reached 300,000. Far-right President Bolsonaro, whose family has close ties to Marielle's killers, has overseen a devastating pandemic response that has affected Black women, Indigenous and poor Brazilians disproportionately. Many campaigners in Brazil have labelled this pandemic response as genocidal. On top of downplaying the virus and spreading misinformation throughout the pandemic, Bolsonaro's policies have been discriminatory. Even now, twice as many Brazilians have received vaccines as Black Brazilians. His racist, prejudiced and authoritarian rhetoric has also led to a shocking increase in violence against women and the LGBT plus community, and in particular, Black women in politics have actually received threats, attacks and abuse. Inspired by Marielle, there has been a surge in Black women getting involved in politics and becoming elected officials. We are all proud to call them seeds of Marielle. And our speakers tonight are part of that movement because of the power of their message and because of who they are. Marielle's seeds have all received horrific death threats and attacks. We must make a stand internationally against this absolutely abhorrent and disgusting abuse. And these threats must be taken seriously. Femicide is on the rise in Brazil. And I was devastated to learn that a woman is murdered every 7 hours in Brazil, while some reports put this number even higher. I think these figures are absolutely stark and horrifying. Bolsonaro's inflammatory remarks have stoked the flames of racial hatred and misogyny. That is why it's so important that we celebrate those on the front line of resistance against him, and why we are going to be hearing from tonight's inspiring speakers. And the resistance they represent is growing stronger and stronger every single day. Whether it's resistance of Black women against the far right, Indigenous and social movements against environmental destruction, or former President Lula's return to the political scene. We are proud. We are proud to stand in solidarity with the struggle for equality, for democracy and human rights. The fight for equality is a global one. And here in the UK, we've seen how the pandemic disproportionately affects those of African, Asian, and Caribbean background and other minority communities, and how it disproportionately affects women, and how it disproportionately affects the poor. We've also seen the introduction of increasingly authoritarian legislation from the Conservative government aimed at diminishing the power of protests, like the courageous Black Lives Matter movement here in the UK in the summer. And equally important, we've seen domestic violence surge during our national lockdown. It's extremely worrying that the UK conviction rate for domestic violence is just 6.2%. So instead of empty rhetoric, women actually need more support and more understanding of the struggles they face. And I'm proud. I'm proud to be with you here today, continuing the struggle of Marielle and supporting Black women across the globe. Before we hear from our next speaker, I'd just like to remind you that translation is available for those joining on Zoom in both English and Portuguese. And if you require translation, please just check the interpretation button. Give it a click, and at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll find it right there, and just select the language that you need. So I'm hoping that our next speaker has joined us, and so that we can now hear from Renata Souza. Renata is a feminist, a human rights advocate, and state deputy in Rio de Janeiro. She was Marielle's chief of staff before her murder. And she also serves as the president of Rio's Legislative Assembly Human Rights Commission. So over to you, Renata, and solidarity, over to you, Renata. Great, we've got you. Renata, go ahead.
Olá, boa tarde.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon here in Brazil, that is. I am sorry that I'm a little late. I was in another debate, so I'm sorry, but I would like to thank you all for this invitation. I would like to know if I'm speaking slow enough, if that's okay.
I think so.
Perfect. First of all, just to say that we've had 3 years since Marielle's assassination, not to have any response from the Brazilian state. This is something very serious. We have classified this as a political feminicide. And this is something that is important so that we don't naturalize the assassination of women who are in the front line of politics. It is essential that we develop alliances internationally so that we can have more actions in relation to this political violence. Is everything okay? Could you tell Renata that she does not need to stop? She can carry on. And
Renata, do carry on. The translators are with you.
Falar.
They can hear you. And it's perfect. Please continue.
Perfeito, obrigada. Então, quando olhamos o
So as we look at the question of political feminicide of Marielle, we need to classify it, categorize it, because Marielle is not the first victim of political feminicide in Brazil. Unfortunately, she is the one that has international visibility in terms of this types of assassination. We had the sister Dorothy Stang in Pará, who fought and died for agrarian reform and the struggle for land in Brazil. Just like Marielle and Dorothy Stang, we had other women who put themselves in a very vulnerable situation. So it's absolutely essential to have this international communication so that we don't make these women invisible, these women who are in the front line of politics. It is also essential to build a protection network internationally so that we continue to be able to do our work as Brazilian legislators. Political violence is enormous in Brazil. I've already denounced the then governor of the state of Rio de Janeiro to the UN and the Organization of American States because he used to use a helicopter as a platform for shooting down onto the favelas. And we had felt all this pressure onto us, and they asked for the revocation of my mandate because myself, as a Black person that came from the periphery, from the favela, next to Marielle, this man who asked for my revocation, the revocation of my mandate, was the same man who broke a plaque with Marielle's name. So they don't want these Black women who come from the favelas in positions of power. That's why it's so important to classify Marielle's murder as a political feminicide, because this is the way not to naturalize political violence that happens day to day. Today, I'm within the Legislative Assembly, and I was part of the commission. I was president of the Commission of Human Rights, and Marielle was there as well as coordinator. I am the first Black people a person to preside it. And we also found a way to get to universities. I did a journalist course at the Catholic University of Rio, and then a master's and a PhD at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, looking at racism and looking at how Black young people is looking at people who dehumanize Black bodies. And throughout my trajectory, after Marielle is murdered, in my postdoc, I consolidated this concept of political feminicide, which I hope we can appropriate, because we need to say what is happening to women, Black women, LGBTQ+, who are in the front line of politics. The possibility that these women can be killed. This is an enormous possibility. It's very likely. So I think that this moment of talking internationally and connecting internationally and giving visibility to Black women who are in the front line of politics is very important, so that we can carry on living and defending blackness and the ability of our Black people to survive and defend the possibility of us, women, LGBTQ+, to survive. This is what we're talking about. This is Marielle's legacy. Her legacy is not just in the body of one person, because that would be to belittle Marielle. She is huge, and her legacy is for humanity, so that humanity doesn't dehumanize itself. So, as someone who defends human rights, as a Black woman who comes from the favela and who has struggled alongside Marielle to allow other Black women to arrive in parliament, but not to reproduce the rationale in parliament. We are there to be able to reintegrate power. We have a great friend called Talilia Petroni, who is a deputy, a federal deputy in Brazil, and he uses this concept of reintegrating uh, the possession of the power positions to the Black people. And this is how I want to finish, to conclude, thanking the opportunity to be able to talk to you. And I'm available here to be able to carry on with our debate, develop further this, because I've got my social media under Renata Souza Rio, and my site is Renata Souza psoul.com.br. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you very much for this opportunity. We'll carry on in the struggle for Marielle and also for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was absolutely
Obrigada.
fantastic.
Obrigada.
And so important for you to contextualize that and put it in clear terms, in terms of what Marielle faced and what you continue to face as Black women in Brazil, the political violence. That is such an important concept to understand, even, and the whole femicide debate. Thank you for highlighting and making clear what that also means for women in the struggle. I want to move us on to our next speaker. We are now going to hear from Andreia de Jesus. In 2018, Andreia became the first Black woman to be elected as a state deputy for Minas Gerais. I hope I've said that correctly. She currently serves as president of the Permanent Commission on Human Rights and as vice president of the Commission on Women's Rights of the Legislative Assembly of Minas Gerais. And I hope, Andreia, you'll correct me if I've got that wrong. Thank you, and over to Andreia.
Perfeito. Salve, salve, mulheres. Salve.
Hello, women, sisters, brothers and sisters who are getting organized abroad. And I would like to say that such a strategy of survival in other areas, in areas where we are trying to expel us from. The best strategy is the one you are putting in place right now. It is actually an African strategy, which is to work in the form of quilombos. We had this in Brazil. We learned how to get together despite of differences so that together we could resist. Everything is okay with your pronunciation? Yes, I am the president of the commission, and we've been making policies through the use of our bodies and the subversion of language as well. So I like to say that we are a president that in Portuguese we say presidenta with an A at the end. And we think it's important to change the language this way. It's important to use words in the feminine, and so to say president in the feminine version. So we are once again going through the ocean, crossing the ocean so we can meet our sisters on the other side of the shore. But it's a different direction right now. We are a colonized country that encounters the colonizing countries. So this is a historical data, so it's important to acknowledge that, who we are and from where we speak. So once again, my name is Andreia de Jesus, a Black woman who lives in the outskirts of Minas Gerais. I live in the periphery, such as Marielle, who became a political subject in the periphery, a place where the absence of everything is the rule, where studying is a privilege. You have to sleep at the door of the school so that you can have a place to study. So we are usually single mothers. We take care of our children on our own. I have a son, he's 23 years old, and I could only study because of a popular preparation course that was given to women in my situation. And why am I saying this? Because I'm talking about who I am, who Marielle is, and her seeds. And that's why, so here I'd like to greet my sister, Renata Souza, who took office in 2018, such as I did, going against the statistics. We had no money for the campaign. So we actually had this ancestral strength that led us to taking and occupying this position. So we only when you think about our ancestors, we can understand this power, this push, this strength. And without Black women, there is no Brazil, there is no UK, there is no Europe, there is no American or African or European continent. We are the base of the economy worldwide. And taking into account that feminicide and the body is under attack is because we are going through an economic crisis that didn't start because of us. I was not in power when the crisis started. Black women were not taking decisions when the crisis started. However, this crisis that started off in the north is now squeezing the south. That's what we see right now. We are being pushed because the north is in crisis. Whenever there is a crisis, it impacts the ones who are at the bottom much more stronger. Our territory becomes strongly under attack, and we live it every day, Black women and Black men. We see that we are more and more being jailed when the country is under crisis. The attack to women's bodies increases in times of crisis because that's my territory. My body is my territory, my body that I use to work, to take care of my children, take care of my community. So this territory is under threat. This body that I have to use to study so that I can take care of my children, take care of my parents, take care of my community. So that's the difference. When we see the situation that Black women go through once they arrive in power. And people don't like it because when we are able to understand politics and we get free from all the oppression, we end up being persecuted. And Marielle was persecuted until she was killed because she was not doing the old politics, which is aimed at maintaining poverty, the maintenance of ignorance. She was actually fighting against the context that puts us under repression, that puts youth, the Black youth at prison, the youth who is being killed. And that's why we use the word genocide, because they are being killed in so many ways. And when it doesn't happen They are being jailed. They are being killed by the police. Our public security model in Brazil only protects private property. Here in Brazil, Black men and Black women, we don't own a private property. Everything we produce is shared. We share to release. We share to help people under apartheid, going through the pandemics, going through crisis. And that's what changed. That's what's new. Marielle taught us that standing still also means kicking the door so that we can stay alive. Indigenous women in Brazil, they call it the retaking. And I'm calling it institutional occupation because we occupied the legislative assembly. There was no invitation from political party, from the traditional institutions in Brazil, so that Black women could have a role, could occupy a position, could, put our names on legislation, on budgets, and etc. So we actually kicked the door and we could go in. And the purpose is to change the dynamic and not to maintain it. Marielle, she was the head of the Human Rights Commission, and she spoke about the violence by the police. But she also took care of people who suffered the violence from the police. So we are not here to divide. And our bodies, they make people uncomfortable, and our political agenda as well. My body, the way I look, the way I talk, the way I walk, the places I go to. You know, people feel threatened. It disturbs people. There is a political violence ongoing in Brazil. Other women are undergoing the same situation. And here we call women in Brazil, in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, from everywhere. Because after the end of the slavery, we Africanized the world. There is no territory in the world that has no structure without the Black population. So we invite you all to react to this violence by means of putting forces together, regardless of political party, the geographical area, because that's why Marielle was killed, because we know how to do things. We have a project of nation, and this project is underway. I see Claudia, and that's it. Our project is underway. It is a life project, and we know how to ensure the life of our families and our friends. Here in Brazil, we are going through a pandemic, and we were able to present 7 bills. And many people ask me, how did you manage to uh, um, to get elected? And I say, this is a spell, a magic spell. It's about the the multiplication of the bread. So we, as I said, we proposed 7 bills of law in order to provide people in prisons with medical services and all the things. And we the parents could not visit their daughters and their son who were imprisoned during the pandemic. And as to women, to violence against women, it increased highly during the pandemic because the violence is even stronger when women find themselves isolated. So taking care uh, of our communities to is also to demand accountability from the state and to declare who is getting a vaccine, where and how. because not even the virus is not democratic in Brazil, you know, because the comorbidities and the difficulties, they have a greater impact on Black women. And to conclude, we women, Black women in power, we are against prison, and we try to reduce the outcomes of racism in Brazil until we get to one day where the criminal code will no longer be used, because the criminal code is used to convict Black people and poor people here in Brazil. We have a selective legal system in Brazil, and we fight against it by taking care of our communities and of life. In the state of Minas Gerais, there is a prison with 17 women who are imprisoned and pregnant at the end of their pregnancy, and all of them are infected with COVID. They are infected, and other 6 babies. This prison is a prison that usually has women with who are pregnant or with small babies. So the state is maintaining these women in prison with a COVID at the very end of their pregnancies. So if we cannot call it a concentration camp, what should we say? I don't need to tell you what's the color of the skin of these women. Take a look at me and you can see the face of each and every of them. So we speak out about this, and we are fighting against a state that doesn't want us. We have a lack of food, lack of medication, and everybody's responsible. So the South is asking for help, and the North needs to think about what happened. The international crisis has a greater impact on the South. We are not going to give up. We do politics every day. We bring food, we bring prayers, we bring blessings to ours. But politics has a color, and we have to use everything we are to fight. And you know, we have to celebrate, because celebration nourishes, celebration puts us together. And with the spell, with the celebrations, I sing, I smile, I cry, and I resist. Otherwise, I won't be able to breathe. And the world is saying I can't breathe. But here in Brazil, we have traditional indigenous population fighting for the forest, and indigenous women are fighting every day. So thank you. Thank you very much. I remain at your disposal. And Marielle is alive because we follow her legacy. Human rights means the rights for all and of all. We are today invisible, but we become visible by our actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andreia. That was absolutely fantastic, highlighting in very clear terms for everyone how the construct really of state oppression operates, breaking it down for what it means to women personally and what it means in terms of people's everyday lives. And the fact that highlighting that we have to push through is so important. We've got a big fight on our hands, and you have amplified that in very clear terms. In the UK, we call what you've outlined socialism. And I can't think of any better term for what the politics of the future really, in terms of what we need to do to bring about the kinds of change that is necessary. But the fact that you highlight that we have to kick down that door, we have to push through. We have that struggle on our hands. And in a sense, you've highlighted you've highlighted in very clear terms what the legacy of Marielle has been. We've got some time for some questions. So I want, hopefully, Renata, Arielle, that you'll stay on shortly just to respond to some of these questions. But I want to give a shout out to the people that have joined us from right across the world. And I'm looking through the chat, and I know that you've all highlighted where you are. So joining us we've got people joining us from Birmingham in the UK, Colchester, Southeast London, from Greece, from France, from Santiago, also from Chile, from Edinburgh, from Cologne, from Brazil itself, East Midlands here in the UK, from London, and many places across the world. So please keep telling us where you're from. Please keep sharing and giving us a shout out, because this is truly an international, global movement, as has been highlighted. And the power of what's happening now in terms of Black lives right across the world helps to amplify that message. And this notion that Andrea has just indicated, the global north and its impact on the global south is significant. And that's why this is an international struggle. And in a sense, the political violence that Black women face is not just obviously one which they face in Brazil, which they face in the UK, but right across the globe. And we need to connect to that, which is why we're here. That is the legacy of Marielle. I've got a question whilst we've been talking. So I don't know if you can hear this question, Renata and Andrea, but the question is how has the COVID pandemic affected Black communities and favelas, and what are the best options to protect them from the pandemic? I know, Andrea, you've already highlighted some of that, but maybe we can build on that. So Renata, I don't know if you want to go first, that would be helpful. Okay, over to you, Renata.
Bom, que maravilhoso a gente estar aqui com pessoas de diferentes.
It's great to be here with people from different nationalities. It's really important that we're able to strengthen this network, this international network, not only for debating, but a protection network. Because I'm sure that Marielle, she died because of her invisibility. She only appeared in politics when she died, when she was killed. And she was doing a brilliant work, an amazing work during her mandate. So I think it's important that we understand that there is a politics of invisibility that kills. Men, white men, when they're doing politics, they are visible. They are called to talk in different debates. They are summoned by the press to give their opinions about different things, whilst us Black women in politics are not usually the source of information to the media. And it's important that these invisibility networks can be developed. The pandemics has brought us a very vulnerable situation in the peripheries of Brazil. We have almost over 300,000 people dead in Brazil. We have over 35,000 people dead in Rio and Rio de Janeiro at the beginning of February. We had more people dead than the whole city, than in the city of São Paulo, which has double the size of the population of Rio. It's important that people see the situation we're in at the moment. And the impacts on the favelas and the Black people are huge. We have data, for example, that show that the Black population during vaccination was less vaccinated, that the white population were more vaccinated, even though we haven't even got to 5% of the population vaccinated in Brazil because of Bolsonaro's denialist position, this anti-science policies that he implemented in face of a fatal pandemic. We have to remember that the people from the favela and the peripheries was already difficult even before the pandemic. We had a huge number of unemployed people, of people living in misery, in extreme poverty. And now these numbers are out of control because if we already had this vulnerability before the pandemic, now extreme poverty has grown exponentially. We have in the favelas of Rio, the number of people of who are dead are similar to the number of people dead in countries. This is very serious. And we're talking about huge numbers in very small favelas. And this shows the political negligence that is towards the Black people in the favelas. We have just done a study with the Institute Fiocruz. Rio de Janeiro has one of the most important excellency centers in our country. They are in our city. Then we have the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, its technological centers. We have the Institute Fiocruz, which is right next to the community Maré, where myself and Marielle were born and grew. I remember that there were vaccination programs, and I used to go to Fiocruz to get vaccinated. And these programs that Brazil had as an expertise in terms of vaccination Bolsonaro destroyed completely. We used to be referenced in terms of vaccination, mass vaccination. And now we're living a very different situation where this government has decided who is going to live and who is going to die. This is absurd because this is a genocide government that imposes its denialist concepts of someone who is flirting with fascism in a very easy way. And we can see this from him and the people who take part in his governments. We can see the number of occurrences where ministers have put references relating to Hitler. We can't say that this is by chance. There is the construction of a new fascist camp, of a white supremacy that is showing its face in Brazil. And this is very dangerous, especially for the people in the favelas and peripheries where we have the largest numbers of Black people. In Brazil, where we have over 56% of its population being Black, is just left out in face of a pandemic like this. It's very essential that we look the situation in Brazil, that we observe that the peripheries and the favelas, which still don't have any water, and this is absolutely essential because we know that water is about natural sovereignty and is also a humanitarian factor. The United Nations recognize water and sanitation as an essential element for humanity. And we know that for every R1 invested in water and sanitation, we have a return of almost 4 times in terms of savings in our public health. We know that public sanitation and health, therefore, are absolutely essential. And in the pandemic, there is a lobby on the side of the government to privatize sanitation and water services. In Rio, we have a huge water crisis, and people who need to wash their hands in the favelas and peripheries, they can't find water, not even to drink. So this is very serious. They've degraded our public water company in order to justify its privatization. So favelas today and the residents, the Black people, are in greater risk than other parts of the population, because today we have daily police operations that kill people every day. We had an increase of 161% in terms of murders, where you have police coming over to kill people during the pandemics in the first 2 months of 2021, 161% more than we had in the same period last year. So if we have no vaccination, and if we don't have any beds, and if we don't have water to drink or to clean our hands and wash our hands, then we have a government in Rio which is also preferring to buy closed up vehicles and weapons. And these vehicles remind us of the yellow melon in South Africa. We have a model of this sort of cars in Brazil, or vans in Brazil. And one of the companies that sells these vehicles are South African, because of this expertise in separating and apartheidizing Black and white people. And this is what's happening in the pandemics. We have no water, we have no emergency support. With the money that is now made available, we can't even buy food. And what there is shooting, it's bullets which hit the Black people. So it's the genocide of Black people that takes place every day in the favelas. This is what is happening during the pandemic. And us from our party, the PSOL, have gone to the Public Prosecution Office to talk about the repression of the police during the pandemics, because we have the Supreme Court that guaranteed an act saying that there wouldn't be these operations during the pandemics. But really what happened is the opposite. We have a higher rate of these operations in our favelas. Even as the favela doesn't have any water, it does have bullets flying and killing our Black population. This is the portrait of the pandemics here in Rio de Janeiro and Brazil.
Thank you so much, Renata. Thank you for that. That passion and that explanation was deep.
Obrigada.
Can I now bring in Andreia, and just to say that obviously the work of Marielle was, she did a lot of significant work around police racism, as I understand it. And so highlighting that, the work that needs to be done with the police there, Renata, is really important, because that connects with Marielle's work and the work that she did. Andreia, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, but I think that we've got a number of other questions, and maybe I should ask you one of these other questions. And just to give a shout out as well to the people that are joining us from Wales, from the Midlands, from Chicago, from Sheffield, from Brazil, itself, and Greece. You're all very, very welcome. And you're listening here to myself, Claudia Webbe, Member of Parliament here in the UK, a legislator, to Renata Souza, right there in Brazil, and Andreia de Jesus also right there in Brazil. This is a truly international forum, and as Black women the world over, we need to continue to come together, continue to raise our voices, continue to push through to make changes, and make changes that are in the interest of our people. Because when women are in power, we can make changes that affects the whole nation. When Black women in particular are in power, we can make changes that address all of those isms, the racism, the sexism, the femicide that we face. And it's on that question of femicide, actually. I'm going to pull that one out because there was a question for Renata in particular about explaining what political femicide is, because this is something that Renata mentioned. So I'm going to come back to you, Renata, but I want to see if Andreia wants to have a look at that, because I think it's such an important concept, because here in the UK, what it means for us is, this is, we're talking about the specific targeting of women because they are women, the specific killing of women because they are women, and the political response to that is to not create any change that protects women. When this is happening, and in the UK, I mentioned earlier, only 6.2% conviction rate, 6.2%. Then the state is not protecting women, and that's the problem. So, Andreia, just want to take that one away as well. I'm going to come to Renata on that as well, because you made a powerful introduction to political femicide, Renata, and I'll come and end with you on that one. Andreia, over to you.
Então, eu queria comentar as duas perguntas. Eu acho que
I just wanted to talk about these two questions. Andreia talks about, Renata talks about the political feminicide, and we need to say how this is structural. The absence of women in these spaces, the absence of our work, is a way of making us invisible, taking us out of the labor market to go back to our houses and to look after the reproduction of life. It's a way of making us invisible and killing us. So to fight for everything that we produced is within the market, to be inserted back in the market, to become more valuable, because everything that we produce and reproduce is a way of maintaining life as it is. It's important to say this. And then when we talk and we say that Renata brought many things about favela, but I follow the traditional communities. What are these? They're indigenous villages, people who live in territories or land in conflicts. Land is power in Brazil. Who has land disputes or goes after power, killing people and taking people out of their traditional land. So the former slave communities, the quilombolas, who are in land because they managed to gain through their work, are constantly in conflict with the monoculture, which are plantations of eucalyptus, soya, sugarcane, ethanol. These communities are in conflict all the time, And this hasn't changed in the communities. And as well as having our land being taken over by land grabber, we're still facing poverty and inequality that has become worse. And these people haven't access to electricity, to water, and even if those who have can't pay their bills during the pandemics because us Black people work in the informal market. We sell things in the streets. There's some people who live from cleaning other people's houses to receive money on a daily basis. This sort of services were cut during the pandemics. Social isolation, which is the answer that we need to have and maintain to stay at home. For these people, it's a huge challenge because they're at home with their empty pans, being hungry, and they're suffering from having to pay the water and the electricity bills. And here in the state of Minas Gerais, we managed to approve a law at the beginning of the pandemic, which I put through in Parliament. And now we don't cut electricity and water anymore for those who can't pay and are registered in the single register for social services in Brazil. But we have a number of challenges to overcome, including the vaccine. The vaccine has become an ideological and political debate. So we're prevented from buying vaccination from Russia, from China. And it was announced today that the Fiocruz Foundation institution and the São Paulo Butantan Foundation are producing vaccines. But up until now, we were prevented from buying vaccine from countries which, according to the president, did not have an agreement, a political agreement with him. And to say that the the pandemics not only causes profound inequality, but an appetite, because a number of people who have been vaccinated, it, white people, double that of black people. We have seen the black market of vaccines with the permission of the governor. We have over 2,000 vaccines that have been given to an elite, which is buying vaccination outside the country and self-vaccinating. So we have some challenges, which sometimes the media doesn't explain, and especially in other countries. And why not say that the invisibility of women, if we had more Marielles in Parliament, more of us in Parliament, the answer for the pandemics would be different. Our women are hungry. We're going to have a minimum income, and we are claiming for money that is being taken from us because the national treasure was constituted from the buying and selling of slaves. So the state needs to give us back. So we need to have this basic income, and the emergency income has been cut by a third. So we're fighting for this and fighting for vaccination that reaches Black people who are hungry and in poverty and without any infrastructure. And I say the indigenous people, the traditional people, and the former slave Quilombola communities who live in land that were given to them through their liberty. This is a right that is being threatened either by mining companies, either by the use of the water for mining, but also through agriculture, monocultural agriculture that kills our water-based systems and leaves us with no future.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that powerful testimony, as always. We are slowly running out of time, or should I say we are quickly running out of time. I know that people are starting to leave us, so I don't want people to leave us before we've ended. So we're going to move towards some closing remarks, if that is possible. Renata, I said I'd bring you in. If you could just, in some just very short sentences, really just expand that little bit on the political femicide, because it's a direct question for you. If you could just explain that in clearer terms for people. People want to know, what do you mean by political femicide? And I know that Andreia has already highlighted the lack of representation, for example, in our parliamentary system as lawmakers. And so I know that in the UK, only 20%, 22% of the government is women. So in a sense, we're not represented. We're not going to get the policies that will bring about change. But what do you mean, Renata? And if you could follow that on very quickly, because this is going to be the final question. I'm only going to pick one question before we actually sum up, that I want both you and Andreia to come back in. And that is a question about, and I'll just find it here, a question about what do we need to do? How can we strengthen our international solidarity for Brazil and what we talk about in terms of the pain that the people in the favelas are going through, because that was so powerful to highlight the kind of deep oppression that people are experiencing. What do we need to do in terms of our international solidarity? That's going to have to be a quick summary, because we must end absolutely by about 15:15 at the latest. Okay, so over to you, Renata.
Bom, a solidariedade internacional, ela é fundamental.
International solidarity is key and very important. Andreia has said that this is very important. And Claudia, it is also very important to see you playing such an important role. And I believe that we, Black women, at the front line of politics, we needed to meet more often. We need to exchange more often, as we have similar challenges. We are silenced in our parliaments. We are ignored as political subjects. We want to subject us to politics. But when we are closely linked through Black movement, women's movement, LGBTQ plus movement, we are often hostilized. And Andreia mentioned about this, the former slave communities that are oppressed by a government that denies the very diversity in Brazil. We are about 56% of the population. So how can we be ignored in all spaces of power? How can we be invisible to this government that is unable to see diversity in Brazil? I said Marielle's murder is a political feminicide, and this is to draw attention to this space, to this area where we should do some construction work together. Because policy violence and political violence, they go through political feminicide. So we needed to find means to exchange, to have international visibility to Black women who are doing lots of construction works everywhere in the world. The resistance in Brazil has a color, it has a gender, it has an ethnic, it has a class. The resistance is Black, it is poor, it is made by women, LGBTQ+, indigenous. That's resistance in Brazil. That's what resistance looks like in Brazil. This country where we have Bolsonaro, this negationist power, someone who denies the possibility of surviving a sanitary, humanitarian, and economic crisis that is worsened by the COVID. So I am available at your disposal so that we can set the basis together, so that we can work together, because international fight is necessary. Being an internationalist, I see the international struggle as being essential. So it's very important to be able to exchange with you. So thank you very much, Claudia. Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much for everybody who joined our conference. And please follow us on the social network so you can follow our actions at the Brazilian Parliament. So all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata. That's brilliant. And just Andrea, in a couple of minutes, really, no more. If you can just give us some closing remarks in terms of that final question. What more can we do to show international solidarity?
Claudia. I think that we are doing something great today. I mean, you're allowing us to speak. We don't allow others to speak on our behalf. Not allowing others to speak on our behalf is already very important. So international solidarity also stems from concrete actions. We've had a lot of help here in Brazil, financial through projects that are carried out at favelas, at occupations, the possibility of having interchanges at foreign universities. These interchanges allowed us to send Black women abroad so that they could follow education and study. And it's important to have people with knowledge about the global market, because it's important to understand how our wealth is bought and sold. Lots of Brazilian resources are sold at very cheap prices. We see this with gold, iron ore. The black gold is being exported until today and at no rate, basically. So it's important that European countries that buy from mining industries in Brazil, they are aware of where this mineral come from. Because if the mining company exploits land, kills indigenous, do not buy from them, boycott them. And finally, we need to act together in order to remove the person who killed Manuele away from power. And we need to take away from power everyone who kills us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and that gives us an important reminder, really, of one of the significant tasks that has to be done for Brazil. Is that, absolutely we need to change the politics of Brazil in terms of who is running the country, because the change is absolutely necessary. But and equally making sure that everybody is able to come through this whole pandemic. And as you're saying, the Amazon is burning and land is being stolen, and land is being mined, and the environmental destruction that brings. The growing resistance in Brazil deserves massive international solidarity in honor of Marielle Franco. From the need to put people and their health first in response to the coronavirus pandemic, to the need to protect our environment, to making the slogan Black Lives Matter a reality, to the fight for women's liberation. We have so much to do. We have so much to give. Your fight in Brazil is our fight. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank Renata. I want to thank Andreia. I want to thank you, the audience, for being with us. Thank you for joining us this evening. Solidarity, solidarity, my friends, solidarity.